The sound of my son's voice through the kitchen wall turned my blood to ice. My name is Robert Mitchell. I stood frozen in the mudroom of my own home, snow still melting on my boots, my hand gripping the doorframe so hard my knuckles went white. I had come back early from my weekly coffee with the boys at Tim Hortons. Something I never did. My truck had started making a grinding noise near Bloor Street, and I figured I'd grab my tools before the transmission got any worse. I should have called out when I walked in through the garage. I should have announced myself the way I always did, stomping my feet, making noise. But I didn't, and that silence saved my life. My son, Michael's voice drifted from the kitchen, low and urgent. My son, my only child. The boy I had raised alone after his mother passed from cancer when he was just 14. The young man I had worked overtime for, taken on extra shifts, missed sleep for. The man I had walked through university graduation, watched get married, helped with the down payment on his first house in Mississauga. Christine, I'm telling you, we can't wait any longer. The bank is threatening to call in the loan. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. If we don't get that money soon, we lose everything. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. Christine, his wife of 8 years, the woman who always seemed to have her eye on something just out of reach. Always wanting a bigger house, a nicer car, a more expensive vacation. I had never warmed to her, but I had kept my mouth shut because Michael loved her. I know, Michael. Christine's voice was sharp, controlled. That's why this has to work. Your father's worth what? 2 million? The house in Rosedale alone is worth 1.5. Plus the life insurance, the pension, the investments. We'd be set for life. My stomach dropped through the floor. The house. My house. The Victorian I had bought 42 years ago, when Rosedale was still affordable for a young firefighter and his pregnant wife. The house where I had raised Michael. Where every room held a memory of birthday parties, and Christmas mornings, and lazy Sunday breakfasts. The cabin up north is perfect, Michael continued. Remote. No cell service. No neighbors for 30 kilometers. Anything could happen up there in winter. A man his age, alone in the wilderness. Heart attack. Fall through the ice. Hypothermia. Who would question it? The cabin. The surprise they had presented to me just 2 weeks ago. Wrapped up like a Christmas gift even though it was early January. A month-long stay at a private cabin on Lake Temagami. All expenses paid. Ice fishing, snowshoeing, the peaceful winter wilderness I had always dreamed of. Happy retirement, Dad, Michael had said, hugging me tight. 40 years as a firefighter. You saved hundreds of lives. You deserve this. I had been touched. Overwhelmed, actually. Since retiring 18 months ago as fire chief of Station 42, I had been at loose ends. The house felt too empty without my Catherine. Gone now 11 years. The days stretched out long and gray. A month in the northern Ontario wilderness had sounded like exactly what my soul needed. The caretaker you found, Christine said. You're certain he understands what needs to happen? My knees nearly buckled. The caretaker. The man they had arranged to look after me during my stay. To make sure I had firewood, check that the generator was working, take me ice fishing on the lake. Frank's done this before, Michael said. His voice was cold, flat, a voice I didn't recognize. He was inside for manslaughter years ago. Got out, needed money, found a new line of work. 15,000, half up front, half when it's done. Untraceable cash. He makes it look like an accident, and we're in the clear. $15,000. That was the price of my life. 40 years of running into burning buildings, saving strangers' children, breathing in smoke until my lungs scarred. $15,000. And you're absolutely certain it can't be traced back to us? Christine asked. There was fear in her voice now. Good. She should be afraid. The cabin's in a shell company. The payments went through crypto. Frank doesn't know our real names. Just the target. Dad goes up there, has a tragic accident, and by the time spring comes, we've inherited everything. We pay off the loans, keep the house, start fresh. I must have made a sound. Some small gasp, some strangled noise of horror, because Christine suddenly said, Did you hear something? It's nothing. Dad's at Tim's like he is every Saturday. He won't be back for another hour at least. But I was already moving. Silently, carefully. Back through the mudroom, out the garage door, into the bitter January cold. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I rolled the truck down the driveway in neutral, not starting the engine until I was on the street, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out right there. I drove aimlessly for 2 hours, circling through the city, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my Michael, my boy, the child who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the teenager who cried when our dog Buster died, the young man who gave the toast at my retirement party, voice cracking as he talked about how proud he was to be my son. But I had heard it, clear as day, unmistakable. I found myself parked outside a small law office on King Street. Eleanor Chen, attorney at law. I had known Eleanor for 30 years, ever since I pulled her out of a house fire on Spadina when she was just a young associate. She had handled Catherine's estate, my retirement paperwork, my will. If anyone would know what to do, it would be her. Eleanor listened to my story without interruption, her expression growing darker with each word. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and pressed her fingertips together. Robert, what you're describing is conspiracy to commit murder. But here's the problem. Without evidence, without a recording, it's your word against theirs. Even if we went to the OPP right now, what would we tell them? That you overheard a conversation through a wall? They'd want proof. So what do? My voice sounded hollow, broken. You have 2 choices, Eleanor said carefully. You can cancel the trip, cut Michael out of your will, change your life insurance beneficiary, and live the rest of your life knowing your son wanted you dead. Or you go to Temagami, you document everything, you gather evidence, and you make sure that when this is over, there's no doubt about what they tried to do. I stared at her. You want me to walk into their trap? I want you to turn their trap into their prison cell, Eleanor said. But Robert, I won't lie to you. It will be dangerous, and you'll need to be smart, smarter than you've ever been. I thought about Michael at age 7, running through the sprinkler in our backyard, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. I thought about teaching him to skate at the rink in Trinity Bellwoods, holding his hands as he wobbled on the ice. I thought about Catherine's face, radiant with love, watching our son sleep, and I thought about his voice on the phone, cold and calculating, planning my death for money. Tell me what I need to do, I said. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Eleanor connected me with a private investigator named Donna Reeves, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had spent 25 years with the RCMP before going private. She set me up with recording equipment, small devices I could hide in my jacket, my fishing gear, even my watch. You need to get Frank to incriminate himself, Donna explained. Get him talking about the plan. Get details, names, amounts. Make it undeniable. She also insisted I take additional precautions. A satellite phone hidden in my gear, since there was no cell service at the cabin. A GPS beacon I could activate in an emergency. A small canister of bear spray that could work just as well on humans. You were a firefighter for 40 years, Donna said. You know how to stay calm in a crisis. You know how to survive. Use that. We couldn't alert the authorities without evidence. We couldn't stop the trip without tipping off Michael and Christine. So I would go. I would play the role of the oblivious father, grateful for his son's generous gift, excited for his winter adventure, and I would survive. Michael and Christine drove me to Union Station to catch the train north. The plan was for me to take the Northlander to Temagami, where Frank would pick me up and drive me to the cabin on the lake. Michael hugged me at the platform, and I forced myself not to pull away, not to let my revulsion show. Have the best time, Dad, he said, his eyes bright. With tears? With guilt? With anticipation of my death? You deserve this more than anyone. Thank you, son, I managed. This means the world to me. Christine hugged me too, her embrace stiff and brief. Stay safe up there, Robert. The wilderness can be dangerous for a man your age. I bet it can, I thought. The train ride north gave me too much time to think. I watched the landscape change outside my window, the city giving way to suburbs, the suburbs to farmland, the farmland to the vast emptiness of the Canadian Shield. Rock and pine and frozen lakes stretching to the horizon. I understood why they had chosen this place. No neighbors, no witnesses, no cell service, just wilderness and winter and silence. Temagami Station was little more than a platform and a small building. Frank was waiting for me, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a gray beard and watchful eyes. He wore a Carhartt jacket and work boots, looked like any other Northern Ontario outdoorsman. "Mr. Mitchell?" His handshake was firm. "Welcome to Temagami. I'm Frank. I'll be looking after you during your stay." Looking after me. I wondered if he could hear the dark humor in those words. The drive to the cabin took 45 minutes on increasingly rough roads. The last stretch, nothing but a snowmobile trail that Frank navigated in a battered pickup with chains on the tires. "Remote out here," Frank said, his eyes on the trail. "Nearest neighbor is the Hendersons, about 30 clicks east, but they're snowbirds. Down in Florida, until April, you'll have the whole lake to yourself." "That's exactly what I was hoping for," I said, keeping my voice light. Peace and quiet. The cabin itself was beautiful, I had to admit. A solid log structure with a stone fireplace, a generator humming in the shed out back, a woodpile stacked high against the wall. The lake stretched out beyond, a vast expanse of white, the ice thick and solid beneath the snow. "I've stocked the kitchen," Frank said, showing me around. "Firewood's in the shed, generators topped up with fuel. I'll come by every few days to check on you, take you out fishing if you want." "That sounds perfect." His eyes met mine for a moment, and I searched for something there. Guilt? Anticipation? But his face was blank, unreadable. That night, I lay in the cabin, unable to sleep. Tomorrow, I would be alone in the wilderness with Frank. Tomorrow, something might happen. An accident, a tragedy. Tomorrow, I might die. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. I had to survive this. I had to make them pay. The first few days passed uneventfully. Frank came by twice, once to check the generator, once to take me ice fishing. He was good at his job, patient and knowledgeable. We caught a dozen lake trout through the ice, and under different circumstances, I would have been in heaven. But every time Frank moved behind me, I tensed. Every time we walked near open water or unstable ice, I watched him carefully. Was this it? Was this when it would happen? By day 4, nothing had occurred. Frank seemed almost friendly, sharing stories about the area, teaching me the best spots for fishing. I began to wonder if I had misunderstood. Maybe Frank was just a caretaker after all. Maybe Michael had hired someone else. Or maybe the plan had changed. That evening, a snowstorm rolled in. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows, piling drifts against the door. I sat by the fire, watching the flames, when I heard a sound that didn't belong. A snowmobile engine, cutting through the storm. I moved to the window but could see nothing through the swirling white. The engine grew closer, then cut off. Footsteps on the porch, a knock at the door. I opened it to find a man I didn't recognize. Tall and lean, maybe 40, with a face reddened by cold. He wore expensive winter gear, the kind you'd buy at a high-end outdoor shop in Toronto. "Thank God," he said, his teeth chattering. "My snowmobile broke down about a kilometer back. I saw your lights through the storm. Come in," I said, stepping back. "Warm yourself by the fire." He introduced himself as Greg Palmer, said he was staying at a cabin on the east side of the lake. "Ice fishing trip," he explained, wrapping his hands around the cup of coffee I handed him. But this storm caught me off guard. Figured I'd ride it out, but then the machine died. Something about his story felt off, though I couldn't place what. The east side of the lake, where the Hendersons were supposed to be the only neighbors, and they were in Florida. A fishing trip in January, alone, at a cabin that supposedly wasn't occupied. "Must be tough, fishing by yourself," I said casually. "Oh, you know how it is," Greg replied. "Work, stress. Needed to get away." The wife was happy to see me go, honestly. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. I offered him the spare bedroom for the night. The storm was too fierce to send anyone back out. He accepted gratefully, a little too gratefully, and I lay awake listening to the wind, my hand on the bear spray I kept under my pillow. The next morning, The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of brilliant white. Greg thanked me profusely and said he'd walk back to check on his snowmobile. "I can come with you," I offered. "Help you fix it if needed." "No, no," he said quickly. "Don't trouble yourself. I'm good with machines. I'll have it running in no time." I watched him trudge off through the snow, then made a decision. I strapped on my snowshoes and followed at a distance, keeping to the tree line where I wouldn't be visible. Greg didn't walk east toward where he said his cabin was. He walked south, toward the ridge overlooking the frozen lake, and he didn't stop at any broken-down snowmobile. He stopped at a spot where the trees opened up, pulled out a pair of binoculars, and spent 10 minutes studying my cabin. My blood ran cold. That evening, Frank stopped by with fresh supplies. I decided to take a risk. "Frank, I have a strange request. There's a man staying on the east side of the lake, Greg Palmer. He stopped by last night during the storm. Seemed like a nice fellow. I was thinking of inviting him to fish with us tomorrow. Would you mind?" Frank's expression flickered. Surprise? Confusion? Greg Palmer? I wasn't aware anyone else was on the lake this time of year. The Hendersons are down south. "He said he's renting a cabin over there." Frank shook his head slowly. "There's no rental cabins on the east side, Mr. Mitchell. Just the Henderson place, and nobody's been there since November." The pieces clicked into place. Greg Palmer was the real threat, not Frank. Michael and Christine had hired someone to stay close, to watch, to wait for the right moment. And Greg had used the storm as an excuse to get inside my cabin, to study the layout, to find the best opportunity. "Frank," I said carefully, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you react." I told him everything. The overheard conversation, the murder plot, the recording equipment I was wearing, my belief that Greg Palmer was here to kill me. Frank's face went through a dozen expressions as I spoke. Shock, disbelief, anger. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I've done some things in my life I'm not proud of," he said finally. "Spent time inside for a bad decision I made when I was young and stupid. But I've never killed anyone, and I'm not about to start. If what you're saying is true, this Greg is going to make a move soon, and you need to be ready. Will you help me?" Frank met my eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, when I took this job, I took it because I needed the money, and it seemed legitimate. Looking after some old-timer from Toronto who wanted to fish and enjoy the wilderness. That's what your son told me when he called. Nothing about any of this." "My son called you directly?" "Said his name was Michael, yeah. Hired me to be your guide and caretaker for the month. Paid well, cash up front. I didn't ask questions." Frank shook his head. "I should have known something was off. Nobody pays that much for basic guiding." We made a plan. The next morning, I would invite Greg to join us for ice fishing on the lake. We'd go to the far side, near the Narrows where the current kept the ice thinner. If Greg was planning to make it look like an accident, that would be the perfect spot for him to try. And we would be ready. I spent a sleepless night, running through scenarios. What if Greg refused to come? What if he made his move at the cabin instead of the lake? What if Frank was wrong, and this was all in my imagination? But dawn came cold and clear, and when I snowshoed to where I had seen Greg watching my cabin, I found him there, poorly concealed behind a stand of birch trees. "Greg!" I called out, friendly as could be. "What a coincidence. I was just coming to find you. Frank and I are heading out to the Narrows for some fishing. Best spot on the lake," he says. "Want to join us?" Greg's face went through a quick calculation. Then he smiled. "That sounds great, Robert. Let me grab my gear." We set out an hour later, Frank leading on his snowmobile, me riding behind, Greg following on his machine. The Narrows were about 5 kilometers north, a stretch where the lake pinched between two rocky points, and the current made the ice unpredictable. Frank had warned me to stay close to him, to follow his exact path. The ice was thick enough to walk on near the shore, but farther out, there were weak spots that could swallow a man whole. We set up our ice fishing gear near a cluster of old pressure ridges. Frank had checked the ice the day before, knew exactly which areas were safe. I made sure to keep Greg in my sight at all times. For 2 hours, we fished. I caught a few pike, Greg caught nothing. He grew increasingly agitated, checking his phone despite the lack of signal, glancing at Frank, At me, at the wide expanse of ice. "I'm going to try over there," Greg announced, pointing toward a spot about 50 meters away, closer to the narrows where the current ran. "I wouldn't," Frank said. "Ice is thin over there. Current keeps it from freezing solid." "I'll be fine," Greg said. "I can see it's thick enough." He walked away, his auger over his shoulder. I watched him, my hand moving to the bear spray in my pocket. "He's going to try to get you to follow him," Frank murmured, out to the thin ice. "One wrong step, you go through, and he's the grieving witness who tried to save you but couldn't. Then let's make sure that doesn't happen." I stood up, stretched, and began walking toward Greg, but not on a direct path. I angled toward the shore, toward solid ice, keeping the treacherous area between us. "Greg," I called, "come back this way." Frank's got the best spot marked. "Just a minute," Greg called back. "I want to try my luck here first." He was drilling a hole in the ice now, about 30 meters from the thin section. I stopped, maintaining my distance. "Actually," I said, "I've been wanting to ask you something. How did you really end up on this lake, Greg? Because Frank tells me there are no rental cabins on the east side, and the Hendersons have been in Florida since November." Greg stopped drilling. He turned to face me, and the friendly mask he'd been wearing slipped away. Underneath was something cold and empty. "You're smarter than they said you'd be." "Who said?" "Your son. Your daughter-in-law." Greg's voice was flat now, businesslike. "They said you were a trusting old fool who'd follow anyone into anything. Said all I had to do was become your friend and wait for the right moment." "And what was the right moment supposed to be?" Greg smiled, but there was nothing human in it. Something like this. Isolated. No witnesses. An old man falls through the ice, and despite the heroic efforts of a fellow fisherman, he can't be saved. Tragic. I pulled out my satellite phone, showed it to him. "This has been transmitting our entire conversation to a private investigator in Toronto, who has been recording everything and is ready to contact the OPP the moment I give the word." Greg's face went pale, then red with fury. "You're bluffing." "Try me." He lunged. I'd been expecting it, had positioned myself with the pressure ridge between us. He had to go around, and by the time he did, Frank was there, a solid wall of muscle and Northern Ontario stubbornness. "I called the Temagami OPP before we left," Frank said. "Told them we might have a situation. They've got a helicopter en route. Should be here in about 20 minutes. Greg looked between us, calculating his odds. Then he ran. Not toward us, but toward his snowmobile. He made it about 10 meters before his foot went through the ice. It happened so fast. One moment he was running, the next he was waist-deep in freezing water, the ice crumbling around him. He screamed, thrashing, trying to pull himself out, but every handhold broke away. Frank moved before I could. He grabbed the rope we'd brought for safety, threw one end toward Greg. "Grab it!" Frank shouted. "Stop moving and grab the rope!" Greg caught it, and together Frank and I hauled him onto solid ice. He lay there shaking, gasping, his teeth chattering so hard he couldn't speak. I knelt beside him, making sure my recorder caught every word. "You're going to tell me everything," I said. "Who hired you? How much they paid? How you were supposed to make it look like an accident? And then you're going to tell it again to the police." By the time the OPP helicopter arrived, Greg had told me everything. $25,000, half up front, half on completion. Contact through an encrypted app with someone calling themselves MC. Instructions, to make it look like a drowning or hypothermia. Photos of me, my cabin, my daily routine. They airlifted Greg to the hospital in North Bay, treated him for hypothermia, then arrested him. The OPP took my recordings, my satellite phone logs, Donna's documentation from Toronto. They made calls to the Toronto Police Service, to the Crown Prosecutor's Office, to the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. Michael and Christine were arrested that evening at their home in Mississauga. The encrypted messages were recovered. The cryptocurrency payments were traced. The conspiracy was laid bare in black and white, undeniable and damning. I flew back to Toronto 3 days later. Eleanor met me at Pearson Airport, and we went straight to the courthouse. I sat in the gallery and watched my son arraigned on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. He saw me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. For a moment, I saw the boy I had raised, the child I had loved more than my own life. Then he looked away, and the stranger who had plotted my death was all that remained. The trial took 5 months. I testified, telling the jury everything: the overheard conversation, the trip to Temagami, Greg's confession on the ice. I kept my voice steady, factual, professional, the way I had learned to do in 40 years of fire investigations. But inside, I was breaking. This was my son, my only child, and he had wanted me dead for money. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Guilty on all counts. Michael received 22 years. Christine got 18. Greg, who had cooperated with prosecutors and testified against them, received 12. I stood outside the courthouse after sentencing, feeling nothing but exhaustion and the bitter January wind. Eleanor stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Robert." "Did I? That's my son in prison for the next 2 decades. That's your son who tried to have you murdered for an inheritance. There's a difference." Frank drove down from Temagami for the trial. Afterward, we got dinner at a pub on Queen Street, not far from the firehouse where I had spent most of my career. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I don't know. Sell the house, maybe. Too many memories. Too much heaviness." "You could come back north," Frank said. "I've been thinking about expanding, building a few more cabins, turning the place into a proper fishing lodge. Could use a partner, someone who knows construction, knows how to work hard, knows how to survive when things go wrong." I looked at him, surprised. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." He didn't smile at the unfortunate choice of words. "You proved you're tough as nails, Robert. You walked into a trap knowing what it was, and you came out the other side with evidence and your life. That's the kind of man I want to work with." I thought about my empty house in Rosedale, the rooms full of ghosts, the memories of a son who had become a stranger, the silence that stretched through the nights. "When would you need an answer?" "Whenever you're ready. The door's always open." 6 months later, I stood on the porch of my new cabin at Temagami Pines Lodge, watching the sun set over the lake. The house in Toronto was sold. The money went partly to a scholarship fund for children of fallen firefighters, something Catherine would have wanted. The rest funded my new life. Frank and I had become partners. We were planning the expansion, new cabins, a proper dock, a lodge building where guests could gather in the evenings. I handled the construction side. Frank handled the guiding and the wilderness expertise. It was hard work, honest work, the kind that left you tired at the end of the day but satisfied in your bones. I won't pretend I don't think about Michael. I do, every day. Sometimes I wake up and forget, just for a moment, what happened. Then it comes rushing back, and the pain is fresh all over again. But I also think about what Eleanor told me outside the courthouse, that I had survived, that I had fought back, that I had refused to be a victim. I'm 68 now. According to Michael and Christine's plan, I should have been dead at 67. But I'm not dead. I'm alive. I'm building something new. I'm surrounded by wilderness and silence, and a kind of peace I never thought I'd find again. Sometimes guests ask about my story, having heard rumors from the locals. I tell them a simplified version, a falling out with family, a fresh start. I don't go into the details. Those are mine to carry. Frank says I'm the strongest person he knows. I don't feel strong. Most days I feel sad, but I'm still here, still breathing, still moving forward. And maybe that's what strength really is. Not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain win. Not the absence of betrayal, but the ability to survive it. Not the absence of loss, but the courage to build something new from the ashes. I survived what my own son tried to do to me. I gathered the evidence. I faced him in court. I watched him sentenced for trying to murder his father. And now I'm living the life he tried to steal from me. Every morning I wake up in Temagami is a victory. Every fish I catch, every guest I welcome, every sunset I watch over the lake is a testament to survival. The Canadian wilderness that was supposed to be my grave became my salvation instead. My name is Robert Mitchell. My son tried to have me killed for my inheritance, and I'm still here. That's my story, and every word of it is true.